Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. Happy equinox to begin with. This week we are doing a topic that comes from KS, and I have this on my phone here. It's a long text, but I feel like I should read part of it, and of course it'll be in the description as always. So KS asks us, how much of the fear and distrust from non-pagans of the pagan community, how much of the fear and distrust that we as a community receive from non-pagans, people outside the community, stems from preconceived notions, and how much is caused by our own community? So that's the overall question. Now they go on to give us a bit of background about why they're asking us this question. They were just part of a debate in a Facebook group where a user asked for a love spell to cast on a man that she was in love with to make him reciprocate the feeling. When a few of us told her it's wrong to interfere with another person's free will, we were attacked by many of the members, including admins, who told us it was none of our business and to butt out. Some of the spells they offered in response were quite disturbing, including feeding him food with her blood in it. This made me think a lot both about ethical issues and possible repercussions. We're not being persecuted in the Western world at the moment, but if someone who already has a distrust of pagans and witches discovers someone doing this and the word gets around, who's to say that our practices won't be outlawed and we won't be targeted again? There are several directions you guys could choose to go if you use this as a topic. What is morally acceptable? What is legally acceptable? How much of the fear and distrust we receive is caused by us and those among us, etc. So, I feel like this is a little bit along the lines of something we talked about a couple months ago. I could be wrong, but I feel like we've recently talked about, we talked about what to do when people inside the community are actually, displaying some of the behaviors that a lot of us don't identify with. And so you may have heard me say this before, and if you have ever watched any of my videos, my personal channel is CuteWitch772. Many of you already know me. If you've ever watched any of my videos, you may very well have heard me talk about this before. But I will say again, for those who haven't heard it or who just need to hear it again, that a lot of this is, I think, able to be solved by the languaging that we use and education. Education is the key to prejudice reduction. I say this all the time in regards to my work with pagans and prejudice and how we receive prejudice and why. Because the way I go about things is you always say, okay, well, this is what I believe. This is what I believe. And so one thing that I might suggest, not saying who is right and who is wrong in the situation at all to begin with, but just reading how this was written, I would say perhaps you could be saying, I believe that it's wrong to do things against another person's free will. Or you could say, many witches believe that it is wrong to do this, rather than telling this person it's wrong, which then prompted other people who disagree to attack you and say, butt out, it's none of your business, which I'll get to them in a minute. You could start by saying, instead of saying that's wrong, you could say, well, that's not among our beliefs. A lot of us don't believe that that's how it works. And so here's what a love spell means to me and in my path, and following the read and not harming anyone else's free will. What you could do instead is, here's a love spell to draw love to you and to make yourself more open to love. And, all of these things, right? Providing alternatives. As far as the other people attacking go, as far as them saying things like, butt out, it's none of your business. Come on, you can do better than that. This is a Facebook group we're talking about. This is a discussion group, and someone came in and asked the group for suggestions about a thing. So if people in the group have an opinion and they share it, you don't get to tell them, butt out, it's not your business. It's just as much their business as it is your business, because you're all members of the group that this person has come to asking a question. There is a much better way to go about that. So we can say, hey, this is what I believe, this is how I believe it works. I, and many other people, believe that it's wrong to interfere with someone else's free will. This is what I would do instead. And then the other people can say, I, however, do not follow that ethical code. I believe that it's perfectly okay to mess with someone's free will. Here's how you do it. You didn't have to attack the other people in the group. And this is why I don't partake in a lot of groups like that, because I often find, and especially this person said even the administrators were ganging up on them, I do often find that people start groups that they then want to be a bunch of people who think like they do, and so when you don't have respectful discussion, and especially if all the admins also disagree with you, that, yeah, I've seen a lot of groups where you just get attacked for sharing what you think is a perfectly fine, or what you may even believe is the better approach to certain things. And so, yeah, I think that having places like that to discuss things is really helpful, but it's also like, yeah, who's this woman coming on this group asking for a love spell? Is she a witch, or did she just find a group of witches, and so she has this stereotype in her head that witches do love spells, and so she's asking a group of witches for a love spell, and she just wants someone to give her what she wants? Because I've definitely had people message me in the past who were like, give me a spell for this, and I'm like, okay, how much do you know about magic? What do you know about magic? And they're like, nothing. So I'm like, okay, learn this and read this and read this, and like then learn how magic works, and I'll tell you how to do something that's more like what you're actually talking about, because what you're talking about isn't magic. And they'll be like, oh, I don't want to learn all that. I just wanted you to give me a spell. I just wanted you to make this happen. It's just a misconception about how all these things work. So I feel like, and I've seen that online, you know, anybody can be a teacher, anybody can write what they want online, and so, and including me, right? And I think the fact that I know this is what makes me so troubled some of the time, that when I see other people writing things as though they are an authority, and seeing young people, especially young people, but also just new people to the community, seeing people follow that advice and like do exactly what they said, when you're like, wait a second, you don't know who this person is, you don't know what their experience is, you don't know if they have any kind of authority in the community, who is this person? Why are you just listening to them? At the same time, anybody could think that of me. And so that's why I hope to, and that's why I try to always be transparent and be as honest as possible. And if I don't know something, I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to pretend that I know a bunch of stuff just to seem cool. No, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you what's really up. And I'm going to tell you if I know of people who do things that I don't agree with, because it's not what I do, but I want you to have information about, like, yes, there are people out there in the world who will say these things and who do these things. And they say that they're part of this community. They're not in my part of the community, is all I can say. I won't say that they're not members of the community, and I'll talk about this more. But yeah, and so I hope that people find the real answers, and that people aren't just finding people who are going to give them what they want to hear and perpetuate the often negative stereotypes about us. I hope that people find real information if that's what they're looking for, and even if it's not what they're looking for, I hope that they find real information and realize that their misconceptions are misconceptions. But yes, there are people out there who identify as being part of this community who just tell people what they want to hear, and they'll give them a silly spell, and they'll claim that you can do this crazy special effect thing that the rest of us are like, no dude, that's not how it works. And so yeah, it's hard. It's out there, and I'm not gonna lie to you. And so I hope that's why people trust what I say, because you know I'm going to tell you what I know. So for me, as you know, many of you know, my path is Wiccan based, although I don't identify solely as a Wiccan today. My path is very Wicca based. And I do try to abide by the advice of the Reed, which we call the Wiccan Reed, but there are plenty of non-Wiccans who follow this general rule as well, which is that if it harms no one, do what you will. And then, as we know, it doesn't tell us what to do if it does cause harm. So the Reed is just kind of advice. It's a guidance to follow, that, you know, we strive to do things that won't harm other people. And so this concept of not doing things that will mess with someone else's free will, yeah, I believe that we should be doing things and forming our intentions in ways that don't force someone else's will to bend to ours, right? Magic is the art and science of causing change to occur in accordance with the will, meaning when I do magic, it is causing change in accordance with my will, but that doesn't mean that it is in accordance with the other person's will. And so everyone has their own personal power, whether or not that person is a witch. They have their own personal power and authority over their life. And I don't believe that I have the personal power and authority to outweigh that person's personal power and authority over their life. So I would not do a love spell to make someone else fall in love with me. I would do a love spell to open myself up to love, or to, just connect more with the overall concept of love, connect more with how I personally am. I would do some inner work of like, how am I in loving relationships, personal relationships, romantic partnerships. I would dive deep into my own self and figure out what's going on with me that might be preventing someone that I am attracted to from also being attracted to me. But at the end of the day, it's that person's will and desire that is going to determine whether or not they love me, not my magic. And so, no, I do not believe that it is right within my path framework to cast a love spell upon someone, such as the one described in this example, right? But clearly there are people who think that that's okay. So what I would do, as me, okay, this is me, not if I were you, okay? This is me, sitting somewhere. Let's say I'm at a pagan bride event, and I'm like, come ask me questions about paganism. I don't know everything, and I'm going to tell you that right up front. So say someone comes up to me and says, I want to do a love spell to make someone fall in love with me. Here's how I would describe it to them. There are people who identify as pagans and people who identify as witches who might give you a spell to make someone fall in love with you. I am not that witch. That is not something I believe in. That is not the way I do things. If you would like to hear options about the way that I do things and the way I believe is best so that we're not interfering with another person's free will and so that you are really getting the most out of the experience for yourself and you're figuring things out about yourself and maybe what is truly available to you in the universe, because you might think that you want this one specific thing, but that's a side note. That's why we also say, universe, please open me up to this thing that I desire or something better, because there could be something better for you out there that you haven't even thought of yet, okay? So if you want to hear some options about what I would do and how I do things within the scope of my path, I can talk to you about that. If you would like someone to give you a spell to force another person's will to fall in love with you, I'm sure there are people out there identifying as witches who will give you that spell. Please go find one of them, okay? So I'm not going to lie and say, no, witches don't do that, nobody does that. And I'm not going to try in this video to delineate whether or not I think those people deserve to call themselves a witch. You practice witchcraft, you're a witch, right? So witchcraft, magic, they're tools to be used, and it is the intent of the practitioner that makes them positive or negative. So I can't necessarily say, oh, those people aren't real witches. They may very well be, I don't know. I haven't met them, but yeah, I would say I'm sure there are witches out there, or people who identify as witches out there, who will be happy to give you that kind of stuff. But that's not me, that's not what I do. Take it or leave it. Yeah, so talking about things like ethics and morals, I know a couple years ago, was it last year? A couple years ago? I don't remember. We did a video about the ethics of bone use in magic, which was one of my favorite videos that I did. And that is a discussion that I've continued. I was recently messaging with someone on Instagram who is a fellow witch who likes bones, like animal bones, and aesthetically we like bones. And I say we because I like bones. Mostly because I am vegan, okay, I mostly enjoy imagery and art involving skeletons and bones. I don't have a lot of bones. I don't collect bones, and I don't purchase things that are made of bone because as a vegan, I don't use things that are animal products or byproducts. The only things that I own that are animal products or byproducts are things that I had before I became vegan that I'm still using unless I give them away, because also part of my worldview being environmentally conscious is not wasting things, so I don't believe in just like gathering all the non-vegan stuff that I already had in my house and throwing it in a dumpster. No, I'm gonna use it. But so for example, I wouldn't buy a carved bone athame to use in my magic because it's bone, it's not vegan. when it comes to bone use and things like that, we talked about, the aspect of consent, that in the story that we were talking about, a news article about someone who was taking bones that had risen to the surface in a human cemetery, that when it flooded, the bones had risen to the surface, and this person was taking them and giving them to witches, and they would pay the shipping, ship them to witches around the world for use in their magic, specifically in curse work and things like that. So, one, we have our own opinions about curse work and what that even means and whether or not we do it. But then there's the idea that they were taking bones from a resting place. Even though a natural process, a flood, had caused them to come up out of the earth, that doesn't mean that they weren't laid to rest in that specific place and that they don't belong to a human being who did not consent to have their bones removed from their resting place, moved wherever, who knows where, and used in someone else's curse work. But again, that's getting into a whole other subject that I could talk about for a while. But so for me, yeah, it was talking about consent issues, what qualifies as a resting place. So I was messaging back and forth with someone on Instagram about this, about animal bones, right? So we were like, forget human bones for now. We're just talking about animal bones. Like when you go out into nature, someone like me, you love hiking in the woods, and you might come across animal bones. Is it or is it not okay for you to take those bones? Is that not their final resting place? And so why is that different from a human resting place? Just these ideas of things that coming to our own conclusions. And so basically the conclusion that we kind of came to was that, well, it depends, right? It depends on the situation. It depends on the energy that you're feeling back from the bones. In many ways, it's just, well, what's okay to each of us, especially when there are not laws surrounding those things. So, desecrating a human grave is something that you can get prosecuted for. Finding animal bones in the woods, not so much, right? So, the part of this where they were talking about, what's legally acceptable. Yeah, and I mean, some laws are really stupid. I'll just say that. Some man-made laws are dumb. Super dumb. Some laws need to change. For sure. However, when there are laws in place about things, as far as our magic goes, I try to keep that in mind, There are ways to just be mindful of rules, even when you're like, well, it's silly because we know we're not doing anything wrong, right? Other people don't know that you're not doing anything wrong. So there's reasons that certain laws are in place. Other laws are dumb and need to change. And that's why we need to get involved in politics. Anyway, so as far as this topic goes, though, another thing, I was just talking to my partner downstairs before doing this, like, okay, so blood, for example. For me, yeah, I guess I'll just start here by saying if I want to use my own bodily fluids in a ritual or in a spell, chill as fuck, I don't care, it's mine, right? So if I'm creating a witch bottle for myself, which as we probably all know by this point, if you've ever looked up a witch bottle or like a protection bottle, usually calls for having your own, some sort of bodily fluid in it. Saliva, tears, sweat, urine, menstrual blood, right? So if I want to use my own menstrual blood in ritual or in a spell that is ultimately for myself, such as protecting myself or whatever, chill. That's me, right? It's mine. I'm using it. I would not put it into something and make someone else ingest it, especially without their consent, because it's mine. It's my power and my energy, so anywhere that I'm putting it, I'm attaching myself to, right? If you believe that's how it works, and that's the reason that we use bodily fluids in magic, it's creating a tie. So, I'm just thinking back now about my past relationships and how many of them turned out to be awful. If I had tied myself magically to that person with my blood, and then it turned out the way that it did, yikes, let's just say I'm glad I didn't, okay? So you never know what's going to happen down the line. You have to be really cognizant of things like that if you're magically tying yourself. I mean, there's enough going on energetically without exchange of bodily fluids, magical or physical, whatever you're getting up to in your relationships. There's enough energy being transferred in any kind of intimate relationship, whether it's a friendship or a romantic partnership, that when it's over, there's a whole bunch of energetic ties and webs that you're gonna have to go through and cut and clear and, get rid of if it does end up something that you want to get rid of that person. I've been doing that work with the same people who turned out to be awful people in my life for years, and that's without ever actually connecting them magically with my blood. So just think about that. But yeah, if I want to use menstrual blood and stuff for myself, which I do, and you can ask me more about that if you like, I'm not cursing people with it, it's work for myself, then cool. And if I want to prick my finger and use a drop of my blood in something for me, cool. But I'm not going to use my blood and my personal energy or just my magic, right? My etheric energy without physical attachment. I'm not going to use my energy to force someone else's will. Period. That's just not what I do, right? I've already covered that. Similarly, I would not be okay with someone taking my blood for that purpose without my consent. So it's just a little annoying to me when people, and I've talked about consent on this channel too, we've talked about that recently as in sexual assault in the community, I talked a lot about consent. It's the same for magic and sharing energy, honestly. So it's really annoying to me when you could ask for permission and you just don't. Like people who go by the, I'll do this first, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. Not when you're messing with someone else's consent, and their own personal power and authority. So that's where I am on the issue. But also, as far as blood use goes, the menstrual blood is a specific thing because that has to do with period positivity and the divine feminine and specific work that I'm doing. But as far as general, I never need to prick my finger and use blood in anything. I don't need to. And again, being honest, I would be interested in reading stuff like this, but I have not already done a load of research about what really happened centuries and centuries ago. And so I don't know if we know for sure that witches, back in the day, back in our ancestry before they were converted, that they were using blood in spells. And they may very well have, and that's all fine and dandy. And that has to go, it's not fine and dandy for me today. It's history. And so we know the difference between being a reconstructionist and trying to do things the way that things were really done then versus being a modern practitioner, being informed by those practices and updating them for the modern world that we live in today. Whatever may or may not have been done in the past, I do find it interesting that when I was in about 6th or 7th grade, I did a research paper about the herbal code and how, so for example, in Shakespeare, when the witches in the Scottish play are chanting over their cauldron, and they're chanting things about, eye of bat and tongue, or wing of bat and eye of newt and tongue of dog, and all these things that we hear in media about witches, that was code for herbalism. That was plants. Tongue of dog was the leaf of a dogwood tree, and whatever, the head of a lion is the flowering head of a dandelion. Stuff like that. It was code. And I was able to find tons of sources about that when I was in about 7th grade. In middle school, I wrote a whole research paper on it. And things like blood or tears or saliva, things like that were also code. So I don't know how much of those things was real, like prick your finger and put your blood in it, unless it specified your own bodily fluids, such as in protection work. I think we do know that that's an established thing recently, if not centuries and centuries ago. But we don't know how much of that is real, blood, flesh, sweat, tears, and how much of it was code, right? Because that was a thing that people did. And so another thing that I will say is, when I talk to people about things, I can say that I have heard people online have told me things that they do, that they believe, whatever, that I don't agree with. But I've never met anyone in the real world, in person, who has told me that they do these things. And so that might mean that I've never met anyone who does that. Might also mean I've met some people who do these things who haven't told me. And so I have to think, if you're not willing to tell people what you do, then is that not because you have some concept of thinking that there's something wrong with it? Or it might just be because you don't think other people will understand. But that, a lot of us don't tell anyone we're pagans or witches because we don't think they'll understand. But I think that if I did magic, putting my blood into cupcakes and feeding it to people, I think that would be because I didn't want people to know I did that. I don't know, you know? So I can tell you that the people I've worked with in real life don't do things like this. And a lot of them are traditional Wiccan based. A lot of them obviously are reclaiming witches, because those are a lot of the people that I'm working with and hanging out with now. But there's also a lot of people that I talk with a lot online who are not traditional Wiccans, who are not reclaiming witches, who don't do these things. There have been people who have come to me with messages throughout the years saying that they are beginners and telling me that they have gotten these ideas, that these are the kinds of things they need to do. And so the first thing I do is ask them where they got their sources, because it's not, you know, like they'll say, oh, I'm studying Wicca, and I found out that I need to have 5 deities to summon this demon on the 3rd night of winter, whatever. And I'm like, wait, what source did you read that from? Like, who told you that? Because that might be a thing that some people do. Like, there are witches and pagans, I think, who are interested in demonology, for example, so that's a big thing. Things like that, those are not things that I consider intrinsic to witchcraft or paganism. That is a separate study or practice that some people are interested in. It does not mean that all pagans and all witches make use of demonology. Doesn't mean that none of us do. But, you know, it's up to us as a community, I think, to decide whether or not we think that that's acceptable as part of the community, or whether that's something that we would be like, no, those people are not part of my community, I don't condone that behavior, or if it's something that we're just like, well, we're different, you know, they do it, I don't, end of story. So, yeah, coming back to the read, which some people follow and some people don't, we start with, are you harming anyone? No? Cool. We're probably cool if you're not harming anyone. But then, what constitutes harm? We've talked about that as well. So, I will leave you with that. Thinking about free will, thinking about, you know, what do you have the right to do? What do I have the right to do as far as controlling someone else's life and what they will do? There was a lot more to this video that I wanted to say, that I forgot to say, that I went back to say, and it's a long video already. I'm gonna leave it here for you. Thank you for the discussion topic, KS. Thank you all for being part of the discussion. I hope that, if nothing else, that gave you a lot more things to think about, and you've learned a little bit more about my perspective. My pagan perspective. It's the title of the channel. Okay, I'm gonna go now. Have a good one. I'll see you next month, I think, because I think next week is subs week. So I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye. So, I hope you guys enjoy rambly kind of videos like this. Because this is what it would be like if you were sitting down at a pagan meetup at a coffee shop with me. I have my peppermint tea here with my Kellyanna I Walk with the Goddess mug. Not sponsored, but I love Kellyanna. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, Kellyanna, who is a pagan singer-songwriter, musician, and Megan, right here from our very own pagan perspective, are related in the real world. And I met Kellyanna at Dayton Pagan Pride, not this past year, but the previous year, so 2016. Anyway, this is what it would be like, is me just going off on tangents. What the heck was I talking about? Blood. Oh, consent and vampires. Yeah. Can I title this video that? Consent and vampires? I won't. That's not going to be the title.